Welcome back to Kid Speed. Today I'm going to be assembling this Mototec X1 110cc dirt bike. As you can see, I've already pulled off all the shipping container pieces, cut off all the cable ties, and I'm ready to get started. Let's go. Before we start, just want to let you know this video is for entertainment purposes only. Please consult an expert if you have any concerns about assembly. Welcome back to Kid Speed. Today I'm going to be assembling this Mototec X1 110cc dirt bike. As you can see, I've already pulled off all the shipping container pieces, cut off all the cable ties, and I'm ready to get started. Let's go. Next thing is you're going to have to remove this bolt here, securing the forks to the shipping crate. It's a 17mm on this side here, and a 14mm on this side here. This one was actually loose enough so I can just unscrew that. Carefully push that through there, making sure we retain all these pieces. Just give that a bit of a twist, make it easier to get out as you're pulling. Comes on out. We're going to put these back on here, put the washer and bolt back on, set this down so we don't lose it. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the bike off this shipping crate here. You're going to want to go around, just make sure there's no other plastic, no other cable ties or anything else on the bike before going ahead. When shipped, the handlebars will be sitting under here like this. Just take those, gently put them out on top. For the next part, you're going to need an 8mm socket. We're going to undo these two bolts under here. And that's going to allow us to put this front fender on here. One thing to note is the one I've got here came shipped with two washers on the one bolt. You're going to want to make sure that you have one washer on each bolt, like that. This is pretty easy. This just flips up under here. You reach underneath and just screw these bolts back in and secure them up. This is going to be a bit easier than doing it with the front wheel on. Next thing we're going to do is get the handlebars on. So you'll have a couple of pieces that look like this that come in the box. This is what the handlebars get mounted onto the frame with. Let's go ahead. Coming up to the front of the bike, just want to make sure it's really clear. These two go through these two big bolts here. You can see the assembly here as it's put together. This bit's going to be at the bottom and this bit's going to be at the top. This bolt at the bottom here holds it together. Let's go ahead. Alright, here's the first one, so I'm just going to undo this nut here at the bottom. Take this washer, take this rubber piece off. I'm going to slide that through. So you want to make sure there's a rubber piece and a washer here at the top. I'm going to slide that through here, put the other rubber piece at the bottom here, put this washer on next, up this way so it fits nice and snugly, and then tighten it up with this bolt. Alright, next we're going to take these tops off that hold the handlebars in place with a 13mm wrench. Now you'll see there's two washers on here. This regular round washer goes on the bottom. This smaller locking washer goes on the tops. Okay, you're going to see some ridges here on this side and this side. That's where the handlebars are going to sit into those mounts there. So you can see these are loose right now. We still haven't tightened those up underneath. They're a 17mm bolt. We're going to get to those in a second. But for now, let's line these ridges up with those mounts and put these top brackets back on. We're going to tighten the 17mm bolts up underneath, and then we're going to cinch these ones up again to make sure they're tight. They're a little wobbly right now because those bolts underneath aren't done. So I'm going to take my 17mm, under here. I'm going to tighten these ones up. Now these are locking bolts on here, but you're still going to want to make sure they're nice and tight, as these are holding your handlebars on. It's also a good idea, once you've got this assembled, always check some of these periodically after you've been riding the bike for a while, just to make sure none of them come loose. All right, now those bottom ones are done. I'm going to take these and tighten them right up. You can see here, there's a nice even gap here at the front and at the back, right there. If yours doesn't look like that, you can just tinker with these a little bit until you get that nice and even like that, and make sure those are nice and tight. To make it a little bit easier, I've got a block of wood here. We're going to lift the front of the bike up so we can get this wheel on a little bit easier. You're going to want to take a bit of scrap cardboard, which you should have from your shipping materials. Set that on there. Grab the bike here. Just gently sit it up on there. Make sure it's not resting on anything soft, and that'll make it a little bit easier to get the wheel on. To get this wheel on, we're going to want to make sure the side with the brake disc on here is on the side with the disc caliper right here. All right, we've got our bolt here for our front wheel. We've got a large spacer. We've got a small spacer, a washer, and our nut. This large spacer is going to go on the side with the disc brake. This small space is going to go on this other side in here. What we're going to do is we're going to take this bolt, we're going to slide it through here, then we're going to slide this, do it with this hand so you can see, slide this small spacer through here. You can see we've got this small spacer here. I'm going to push that all the way back, slide this up like this, and my cardboard gets out of the way. I'm going to take this spacer, this larger one here, put it in this side. I'm going to nicely push that bolt through so it goes through the spacer. Just push that through, line that up, then that'll come through the other side. And you put your washer on first. Now with any of these bolts, some of these are locking bolts. This one is not a locking bolt. I would recommend for any of these that you're doing up yourself, put a bit of Loctite on there before starting. Okay, I put some thread locker on there. I'm going to tighten this guy up. Remember, we're 17mm on one side, 14mm on the other. We're going to want to make sure this one's nice and tight. Just want to make sure this is nice and tight. For this next step, we're going to take this shock bolt and put it in the rear shock absorber. For this one, you're going to want to be back up on this block of wood, the kickstart. For this last step, you've got this hole where the shock goes into it here. You see this hole here. Get the camera a little closer and see if we can see in there. Right here is that shock absorber. We're going to stick the bolt through this hole here and then through this hole here. Now to get this back shock in, you're just going to have to stick your hands underneath the back of the bike, lift that up, push that shock into place there. What I've found works the best here is to take a hand at the back of the bike, give that a little bit of a lift while you try and push that bolt in. All right, so this bolt may be a little difficult to push through. You can just take a socket, take your 14mm socket. You can see that. Just give it a light tap with the hammer. It'll push that bolt through there. Now this bolt may not want to go all the way through, so definitely don't hit it hard. You just give it a gentle tap. And the reason you didn't want to hit that too hard is because when this bolt hits the other side here, you can see this is not perfectly lined up. So you want to take this, get that lined up with the other side with that same method that we did before. And it goes through. You can see I put a bit of blue thread locker on there as well. You're going to want to tighten this up with your 14mm socket. Now with this one, you're going to take another wrench, stick it on the other side just to hold this in place while you tighten it up. Couple of last steps. Let's get this front guard on here. I'm going to take an 8mm wrench for the front and a 10mm wrench for the back here. Get this bolt off. Now we're ready to get this disc brake on. You're going to take a 10mm wrench. This might be a little tight when you get it from the factory, so you might want to take something and just separate that a little bit so you can get this. Put those two metal pieces in there. Make sure they slide in nicely. Those boots are on. So you're going to want to slide these brake pads over the discs. Then line these bolts back up and put these bolts back in. Take these soft cables here. You can wrap them around like that with this little cable tie thing they give you. Just so you can see there, it's these soft cables that I tied up like that. This hard one, this brake line, you're going to want to keep that one separate. Before we're able to start it, from the back of the bike here, underneath the seat, there's a 13mm bolt we're going to have to undo to connect the battery. Before we connect the battery, one thing you always have to do before you make sure you start it is check the engine oil level. Now these come with oil from shipping. You can see here there's got a good level of oil in it, but always make sure you want to do that before starting it. And once you get this little packet open, there's a little plus sign here in this red. That's the positive, the plus is for positive. And that'll go with your little red cable here. Take that, you want to make sure it's slid through this little rubber piece here. This little piece here sits underneath this piece here so you can screw the battery in. Slide that in there. You'll need a Phillips screwdriver for this. As I said, you're going to want to line this up in a way to minimize stress on the cable there. It's going to be a little tricky sometimes to get started to. That piece underneath, just keep screwing, it'll start tightening up after a while. This little catch here sits just underneath this bolt as you're putting the seat back on, so just make sure that slides up underneath there and you can slide that. Then we'll do up that 13mm bolt underneath. You can take your fuel vent, just stick it on top like that, and that just sits on there. You're going to want to make sure your warning label and your safety piece is securely on here. Take this little wrap, you can Velcro that underneath to secure that in place. Now when you're done, I recommend double checking every single bolt again. You'll have to check these bolts at the top before you put that safety cover on. Check the bolts on the wheel here. Just check everything to make sure it's nice and tight. I also highly recommend checking every single bolt before starting or before riding the bike, just making sure everything is tight. There's instructions in the user manual on what to do in your pre-ride checklist. I strongly encourage everyone to follow that to make sure your ride is as safe as possible. One of the things you're going to want to do before you take your first ride is check to make sure both the brakes work, both the front and the rear brakes, they work and you can see they're operating the way they're meant to operate. You're going to want to check your tire pressures, your chain tension. You're going to want to make sure you have brake fluid. You're going to want to make sure your safety tether is attached. These are just some of the things. Please consult the owner's manual. There's a full checklist in there.